This is a conversation about efforts to responsibly accelerate progress in the development of breakthrough medical technologies. And we're so pleased to have Dr. Jeff Allen, who is the president and CEO at the Friends of Cancer Research. And he'll be joined in conversation by Dr. Lishan Aklog, who's chairman and CEO and co-founder of PAVmed and Lucid Diagnostics. So, Jeff, I'm pleased to turn the program over to you.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thanks to you, Lishan, for the opportunity to talk with you today about an exciting topic. I think we'll go ahead and just jump right in, if that's okay. I think I'm going to jump into questioning, but you are still on mute.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm on now. Thanks.
All right, well, it's nice to see you. So to get us started today, many of us are familiar with the development and regulatory processes associated with prescription drugs, but I think it's worth noting that the paradigm as it relates to medical devices can be quite different. Could you start us off by describing the range of medical advances and technologies that fall into the category of medical devices?
That's really a great thing. Again, thanks for having me. Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity here. That's really a great place to start because, as you said, pills, drugs, or even biologics this underlying science is complicated, but people have a general sort of understanding of what falls under that ranks. And, we've actually tried to broaden the term a little bit and use the term medical technology as opposed to medical devices, because it really captures a bit more of what we're talking about. Within medical devices, it's a huge gamut, right? You can go from CT scanners and robots and artificial hearts and incredibly complicated and expensive pieces of capital equipment, proton therapy devices and so forth, through sophisticated but otherwise implantables like heart valves and pacemakers and defibrillators, tools that are used in every venue, whether it's in hospitals or ambulatory centers or even in outpatient facilities. All of the things that physicians and other clinicians use to interact with patients and improve outcomes all would fall within that, even all the way down to something as simple as a tongue depressor. Actually, there's a category for that in the FDA handles. But one of the reasons why we're talking more in terms of technology as opposed to devices is because there are other areas that go beyond that folks again may not appreciate. That includes diagnostics, an area that we unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we have a much greater understanding of with regard to a whole variety of tools available to test either molecular, proteomic, and other methodologies that are used, and also this whole rapidly evolving area of digital health. That does interface at times with more traditional devices, implantables, wearable devices, things like that, but in a sense has its own, really an own category that deserves particular attention. So, and innovation is moving forward at a fierce pace, as it always has been, but is accelerating through all three of those different sectors.
Sounds like a remarkably vast landscape of things, and giving your vantage point as a real leader in the medical technology area. Can you just give us a little sense about sort of your pathway and what some of your goals are?
Sure. I have an interesting journey. It's a bit serpiginous, or I took a few tacks here and there. I was a heart surgeon for about 15 years. I practiced in several academic medical centers across the country, but always was focused on innovation. I worked, closely with a variety of medical technology companies at the time, more in a consulting role. And me and my partner started developing some of our own technologies, wandered through the wilderness for some period of time naively, and then slowly but surely started to figure out how to advance innovations, just, general opportunities to improve what we do every day. You literally show up to work and say, well, why do we do this way? Isn't there a better way to do X? And it could be some relatively small thing or something more profound. So we started off as device entrepreneurs while I was practicing as a heart surgeon. That overlapped for about 5 years. And then 7 years ago, I decided to hang up the scalpel, so to speak, and we founded this company, PAVmed, to be a vehicle for us to take some of our own ideas, but also our access to innovations across academic medical centers and physician entrepreneurs and so forth, and advance them into the commercial realm. So it's been an exciting and very sort of in some ways magical path over the past couple of decades.
Well, that fits well with the theme of today's meeting, which is then, now, imagine. During that time of your sort of career evolution and experiences in the technology field, how have you seen medical devices evolve in terms of their role of advancing research as well as improving patient outcomes?
Yeah, I don't think in some ways there's we have a bit of a chip on our shoulder because we feel like medical technologies don't get the attention they deserve relative to some blockbuster drug. And there have been remarkable innovations. I can't even begin to start. If you think about the safety, I mean, my own field for years, the safety of undergoing heart surgery compared to what it was like when I was training in the mid-90s. The idea that we can now implant an artificial heart valve while the engine is still running, as they say, changing a valve while the engine is still running, using catheters as opposed to open heart surgery. And the list goes on and on, whether it's in orthopedics or ophthalmology or any other area, the imaging, the improvements in imaging technology, our ability to see and identify. But I think the areas that perhaps are even the most exciting to me because they're newer are some of the innovations within the diagnostic and the digital health realm, right? It used to be that diagnostics was fairly straightforward. You got your blood drawn, and there was a panel of tests. You checked your thyroid, they checked this, and you got an answer, right? And over the last, 10 or 15 years or so, the move towards precision oncology, the level of sophistication of molecular diagnostics, our ability to really probe deep into the biology of what's going on in certain diseases or identify and screen patients based on very subtle biologic disturbances using modern techniques is quite breathtaking. And then, the area of digital health, where the intersection between both traditional devices, again, wearable devices or implantable devices, but also even just purely digital tools that can serve a therapeutic purpose. That's just an area that really has just come to the fore in the last few years.
Yeah, I think we've really seen some of these technologies with transformative potential. Do you think it's safe to say that these advancements have shifted the need to find ways to accelerate patient access?
Yeah, I mean, we are operating within a somewhat, I wouldn't say necessarily archaic, but an older system that wasn't really designed to handle the pace of innovation that we see today. And the thing that sort of one example that I find that I've always found striking historically, and this is also a sign that we're making improvements in this, is that when I was in practice, the European doctors always got first crack at the latest technologies because the regulatory hurdles in Europe were to get CE mark and to just get something out there that physicians could use and collect ongoing evidence on was lower. And the companies were smart and they went to where they could get the product on the market sooner and frankly funded their US regulatory processes by commercializing in Europe first. And that was true for the one example that I gave. Heart valve, transcatheter heart valves were in Europe 4 or 5 years beforehand. And that's a bit tragic in this country because there are patients who would have benefited during that interval time who didn't. That's changing on the regulatory side. There's been substantial progress with FDA, and that balance has shifted. And Europe has also raised their regulatory hurdles a little bit, so that discrepancy has shifted back towards, a bias towards introducing products into the U.S. But there are still substantial regulatory hurdles, reimbursement hurdles, other elements of the system that do kind of gum up the works and make it challenging, particularly since many, if not most innovations start off with smaller companies that have limited access to capital and have to utilize and tell their story to investors in a certain way. And regulatory and reimbursement uncertainties really cloud that picture and stifle innovation.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting point to kind of keep in mind. In the oncology sciences, we're sort of used to having products reach the U.S. market first. So, in sort of thinking about some of the further evolution that you've described and that shift, I want to move a little bit towards some of those regulatory tools. And recognize that I guess it was about 5 years ago that Congress enacted a program that hopefully was beginning to address some of the perhaps misalignment across the globe and find ways to help companies move through the regulatory process a little bit faster. And specifically, it's the Breakthrough Device Program. Could you talk a little bit over the last several years, I guess, number one, what it takes for a medical device to qualify for this program? And then what's different about going through the Breakthrough Device Program as compared to more typical approaches that FDA would use?
Yeah, it's really it's a great program. It's a great start. It basically, I give Jeff Shuren a lot of credit at FDA for just, the sending the message that FDA is really on the side of innovation and wants to streamline its processes. And maybe before getting into those details, there's a recent the most recent engagement between the industry and FDA called MDUFA that is just about ready, hopefully to sign in the next couple of days, has even new tools, even new innovations with regard to how devices can work their way through in a more streamlined way. There's a program, really exciting program within that'll start as a pilot called TAP, which really rethinks the entire way that devices work their way through. But the Breakthrough Device Program is a great start, and it provides basically, it really starts with a definition of what constitutes a breakthrough device. And I'm reading actually directly here from it. It's because it's straightforward. It's a device that provides more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human disease or condition. So it's not just sort of a better widget or, a Me Too competitive device. It really has to show the potential to have a substantial impact relative to the existing alternatives. And you apply for that. We have one product within our diagnostic company where we were successfully able to navigate that. It's similar to the pre-submission process that you undergo for other aspects of your engagement with FDA. And you basically have to demonstrate that you fulfill the criteria. Once you do, then you have really a more streamlined, more intense engagement with FDA. So it's not, okay, just effectively send us what you got when you have it, or we'll have these very kind of prescribed pre-submission processing meetings where we can tell you something, but not everything. It's a much more of an ongoing continuous engagement. Unfortunately for us, we got our breakthrough device designation just as COVID hit. And so the section, the diagnostic group that would have looked at this got overwhelmed, and we really haven't been able to benefit from it, but we're actually looking forward to moving forward within that. So it is a great program. It does provide a streamlined path and an opportunity to move forward. However, I would say the most attractive thing as a company CEO, and why I think many companies, I believe there have been about 400 or so devices that have pursued this, not that have been approved, but have pursued this. What's attractive is that there was at least, there's always been sort of this promise or this sort of opportunity at the end of this process to secure coverage, Medicare coverage, at least transitional coverage, along with FDA clearance. And that was sort of the promise of that, frankly, was in many ways the biggest impetus for companies to pursue this. And that's been a bit more of a challenge to get that final piece of the puzzle solved.
In terms of sort of it sounds like one of the most notable benefits on the regulatory side of things is really this collaborative interaction between the developer and the FDA, similar to sort of the device kind of precursor, I think, in drugs, which is pretty similar. Correct. Do you see any, over the last 5 years or so, have you heard or seen any drawbacks to it
is still fairly early, the number that have actually completed the process. I mean, the hurdle is still substantial. If you need a PMA, if it requires a PMA, you have to demonstrate the data to do so. So I think only a few dozen devices have worked their way through. And so one might argue, how much has it actually enhanced the process of innovation, and streamlined and provided advantages that smaller companies can leverage. But I think at least from our perspective, from the innovators and from companies that are looking to get products in the hands of physicians for the benefit of patients, innovative products, I have to go back to the reimbursement side, because, it's one thing it's fine, it's great to be able to complete this process, to do your PMA or de novo or 510K, and get FDA clearance. But the system that we have now, for the most part, requires the company to effectively subsidize the utilization of the device for some indefinite period of time. Now, if you're a major large cap medical device company, you can do that. You can do that for, that's why again, I go back to the example of transcatheter valves. There was a long period of time during which the large companies essentially subsidized. Very hard for that to happen with venture backed or a small public company that is looking to raise capital to do so. So this promise that I had mentioned on the reimbursement side used to be called MCIT. Now it's that rule was close to being adopted and then got pulled last year, and is now kind of reinventing itself into something called TCET, which is Transitional Coverage of Emerging Technologies. And that's a super critical part of the puzzle. Without that, the breakthrough pathway is really just more of an exercise in getting clearance. I don't want to minimize it, but it doesn't actually provide the advantage, the opportunity for innovation, and also all of the advantages to Medicare beneficiaries, healthcare disparities. And we could talk, there are a lot of areas where this is, incredibly important. So it really does come down to that. It comes down to transitional coverage and reimbursement.
So not only uncertainty for the company, but a uncertainty in terms of actually realizing the patient access.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, just a very clear example. I mean, we have technology that's the same one that has achieved breakthrough device designation that is now available increasingly to private payers. And there'll be a period of time where if you have risk factors that you'll understand this, that indicate that you're at risk for developing esophageal precancer and cancer, and by existing guidelines should be screened. Your access to that technology, office-based test alternative to endoscopy, will depend on whether you have private insurance or Medicare.
Yeah.
And as you might imagine, there are obviously underserved populations that will not have access to that as a result of that discrepancy.
Right. So over the last 5 years, I think, probably like many things in the regulatory arena, there has been some critique raised about the breakthrough device program, specifically that it's been used too broadly. You mentioned a lot of products that have at least applied, or that it hasn't coincided with the superior outcomes. What would you say to those critics about?
Yeah, I think those are all reasonable. I think there's an opportunity to take this rather broad, and some might argue amorphous definition, and be a little bit more specific with regard to demonstrating that this therapy or this technology will actually has the opportunity, if the system allows it to actually have the kind of impact that it promises to. So I would sort of not disagree with the fact, if you look at the list of 400 applications, there are some things on there where you might scratch your head and say it seems a bit Me Too-ish, right? As opposed to something that's truly groundbreaking. So I do think there's an opportunity to do that. And then the other. Again, I keep going back to the same thing. I think if we had good criteria, I don't think I would challenge anyone who suggests that the hurdles have been lowered and there are issues as it relates to safety and demonstrating efficacy. They're really not. It's more just the gears and making things run a bit more smoothly. I think the critiques that led to the pulling of MCIT and are being incorporated in the current side on the reimbursement side is that we see regulatory and reimbursement and coverage as sort of artificially distinct processes, right? And that this basically is sort of FDA handing over something to Medicare and saying, okay, you have to cover this without, there's some sympathy there that, without, criteria or understanding that it'll benefit Medicare beneficiaries, for example, that the data that's being collected is generalizable to Medicare patients and so forth. And from what I've seen with TCET, it looks like those issues are being resolved in terms of what Medicare will require for evidence gathering, real world and otherwise, to justify both regulatory clearance and coverage, and they really should go hand in hand. And I think that's certainly a criticism that's appropriate.
And maybe this is something that will continue to evolve over time. I think what we've seen on the drug side of things, at least a recent assessment that we had done on lung cancer breakthroughs was able to, now 10 years into that program, show that the breakthroughs in lung cancer actually did extend survival longer than the lung cancer drugs that were approved without the breakthrough designation. So sort of that criteria for selection can work well.
But also, if I could just jump in, I think something that's probably been lacking on the technology side we should focus on is that kind of surveillance activity where you say, okay, great, we got this through. We're giving you 4 years of temporary coverage. You have your own specific requirements as to how to maintain that and so forth. But as a society and as a healthcare system broadly, how has this technology, to what extent has it had an impact on real hard outcomes that are definable? So I think having the technology side adopt some of those surveillance initiatives, I think would be great.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I think it's fair to say that there's an exciting future ahead of us, and we're thrilled to have you being part of it to lead us through it. And I really enjoyed our discussion.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it.